Gente más. Corre, 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 corre.
This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not speculation. This is what the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, the Centers for Disease Control, and the Department of Homeland Security have all confirmed in official reports published within the last 48 hours. The people behind it are the Mexican cartels. And the scale of what is happening, both in Mexico and inside the United States, is something that every person watching this video deserves to understand fully. So before you scroll past this, before you decide this story does not apply to you, consider this one fact. In 2024, fentanyl produced by Mexican cartel laboratories killed 48,422 Americans. That is 132 people every single day. That is more than 5 Americans every hour, around the clock, and every day of the year. And the cartels responsible for those deaths are not weakening. They are at war with each other right now, a war so violent, so widespread, and so out of control that entire Mexican cities have been emptied by fear. Stay with us, because what is happening in Mexico right now is not staying in Mexico. Somewhere in your city right now, there is a weapon. You cannot see it. It does not look like a weapon. It might be sitting inside a backpack, hidden in a glove compartment, tucked inside an envelope that looks like any other piece of mail. It has no trigger, no barrel, no explosive charge. But it has already killed more Americans than any foreign enemy in modern history. And the people who made it, packaged it, and sent it to your city are not hiding in caves on the other side of the world. And they are operating out of Mexico, a country that is currently experiencing one of the worst waves of bloodshed in its modern history. And they are doing business in your neighborhood, whether you know it or not. To understand the weapon being used against American communities, you first have to understand the people who built it. The Mexican cartel landscape has been shaped by decades of violence, shifting alliances, and an almost unimaginable amount of money. The illegal drug trade generates an estimated $500 billion annually worldwide. A significant portion of that money flows through Mexican cartel networks. Organizations like the Sinaloa Cartel and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known as the CJNG, have used those resources to build criminal empires that span continents, corrupt governments, and then arm themselves with weapons more commonly associated with military forces than street gangs. The Sinaloa Cartel, once led by the infamous Joaquin Guzman, El Chapo, operates in at least 40 countries. It is not a regional crime group. It is a global enterprise. After El Chapo was imprisoned and sentenced to life plus 30 years in a United States federal court, leadership passed to Ismael Zambada, known as El Mayo, a figure so deeply embedded in the cartel world that he evaded capture for decades, while the DEA named him one of the most wanted men on earth. In July of 2024, El Mayo was captured and transferred to United States custody. Most people expected that arrest to bring some measure of relief. Instead, it detonated a war. With El Mayo gone, 2 rival factions inside the Sinaloa cartel turned on each other. One side was loyal to Zambada. The other was controlled by El Chapo's sons, known in cartel circles as Los Chapitos. The result was an internal war that transformed the state of Sinaloa into a killing ground almost overnight. Homicides in Sinaloa surged by more than 400% in the months that followed. In one single day, August 10th of 2024, 17 people were killed. At least 57 children were numbered among the dead in the months that followed. Nearly 2,000 people went missing, their whereabouts unknown, their families left with nothing but silence. The city of Culiacan, Sinaloa's capital and the historical heart of the cartel world, became a ghost town. Businesses closed, schools shuttered, If families who had lived in the same neighborhoods for generations packed what they could carry and left without knowing when or whether they would return. Reporters documented streets abandoned in broad daylight, storefronts dark, a city holding its breath between bursts of gunfire. And Sinaloa was not the only front. The CJNG continued its own brutal campaign of territorial expansion across Jalisco, Guanajuato, Michoacan, and Chiapas. This organization, which the DEA has called the most aggressive and fastest growing cartel in Mexico, uses military tactics, armored vehicles, and weaponized drones to eliminate rivals and control populations. Their enforcers have filmed themselves executing opponents and posted the footage online as a form of psychological warfare. Local officials who refused their demands were assassinated. Priests, journalists, and community leaders who spoke out were targeted. Since 2006, when the Mexican government first declared war on the cartels, more than 460,000 people have been killed in the conflict. More than 90,000 have disappeared. The Mexican government's own records show that more than 1,500 mass graves have been discovered across the country. Bodies have been found buried in backyards, sealed inside barrels of acid, and hung from highway overpasses as messages to rival factions and civilian populations alike. These are not numbers from a distant history. This is happening now, this week, in a country that shares nearly 2,000 miles of border with the United States. Now here is the part that makes this story about you. When the cartels fight each other, then they are not just competing for Mexican territory, they are competing for American markets. The United States is the most valuable drug market in the world. American consumers spend more on illegal drugs than the entire gross domestic product of many countries. And the cartels have spent decades building the infrastructure to serve that market. Distribution networks, money laundering systems, and most recently, a manufacturing operation for the single most lethal drug ever introduced to the American market. Fentanyl changed everything. Unlike heroin or cocaine, which require agricultural supply chains and are limited by crop yields and weather, fentanyl is entirely synthetic. It can be manufactured in a laboratory from chemical precursors that are ordered online and shipped from overseas, because it is approximately 100 times more potent than morphine. A kilogram of fentanyl, a quantity small enough to fit inside a shoebox, contains enough doses to kill 500,000 people, and it can be pressed into pills that look identical to legitimate prescription medications, making it nearly impossible for users to identify. Mexican cartels recognized the opportunity and moved decisively. They sourced chemical precursors from China, built clandestine laboratories across Mexico, and began producing fentanyl at industrial scale. The drug was then smuggled across the southwest border, hidden inside vehicles, concealed in commercial freight, and carried by individual smugglers in quantities small enough to evade detection, but large enough to supply entire regional distribution networks inside the United States. And the results have been catastrophic. The Centers for Disease Control confirmed that synthetic opioids, overwhelmingly cartel-produced fentanyl, killed 48,422 Americans in 2024. That number represents a decline from the peak of 76,000 deaths recorded in 2023, which suggests that some interventions are having an effect. But it also means that even in a year of progress, fentanyl killed more Americans than the Vietnam War claimed in 10 years of combat. Fentanyl is now the single leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. More than car accidents, more than cancer, more than gun violence. And a synthetic poison manufactured in cartel laboratories and delivered to American cities through networks that operate with the efficiency and scale of a legitimate supply chain. United States Customs and Border Protection seized more than 27,000 pounds of fentanyl in fiscal year 2024, a record seizure, and that is only what enforcement agencies managed to find. Experts estimate that only a fraction of drug shipments are ever intercepted. The rest reaches its destination. It reaches your state. It reaches your city. It may have already reached your street. The communities bearing the greatest weight of this crisis are not always the ones you might expect. Rural towns in states like West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky have been devastated. Suburban neighborhoods in the South and Midwest have lost entire generations. And emergency rooms in border states have treated so many overdose cases that staff describe a kind of numbing, a steady rhythm of crisis that never fully stops. Parents have learned to check their children's belongings for pills that look exactly like the kind a doctor might prescribe. That is the world cartel fentanyl has created inside America. In early 2025, the Trump administration formally designated the major Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, a significant legal escalation that opens new avenues for prosecution, sanctions, and military coordination. Dozens of senior cartel figures have been extradited to the United States to face federal charges. Military assets have been repositioned to the southern border, or economic pressure has been applied to the Mexican government to compel greater cooperation in dismantling cartel infrastructure. These are meaningful steps, but they are steps being taken against an enemy that has had decades to entrench itself in Mexican institutions, in American distribution networks, and in the economic fabric of communities on both sides of the border. The road ahead is long, and this is the moment where a documentary like this must go deeper than policy, because the facts, as staggering as they are, do not fully account for what is actually happening to human beings on both sides of this crisis. They do not account for the mother in Culiacan, who has not left her house in 3 months because of gunfire outside. They do not account for the father in Columbus, and Ohio, who found his 22-year-old son unresponsive on a bathroom floor because of a pill purchased from someone who had no idea what was in it. They do not account for the 57 children killed in Sinaloa's cartel war. Children who had names, who had birthdays, who had people who loved them. Scripture does not allow us to reduce human suffering to data points. Genesis 9:6 reminds us that every human being is made in the image of God, and that this truth makes every act of violence against a human being not merely a crime, but a desecration of something sacred. The 460,000 killed in Mexico's cartel war since 2006 were not statistics. They were image bearers, every single one. The prophet Micah warned against those who devour the flesh of God's people, who strip the skin from their bones, who break their bones to pieces. Micah 3:3. Those words were written thousands of years ago. They describe with devastating accuracy the cartel economy of the present day, an economy built on the deliberate destruction of human beings for profit. And Micah did not simply lament what he saw. He demanded accountability. He named it for what it was. He refused to soften the truth to make it more comfortable for the people who needed to hear it. Proverbs 21:7 says, "The violence of the wicked will drag them away because they refuse to do what is right." El Chapo sits in a Colorado prison serving life plus 30 years. El Mayo is in federal custody. The CJNG's second-in-command was sentenced to life in a United States federal court in 2025. The cartel bosses who appeared untouchable for decades are being held to account. It's the arc of justice moves slowly, but it moves. But Scripture never lets the rest of us off the hook by simply pointing at the guilty. It asks what we have allowed, what we have looked away from, what we have accepted as normal that should never have been accepted at all. The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 12:21, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." That instruction is not passive. It is a call to engagement. It is a refusal of indifference. Jesus said in John 10:10 that the thief comes only to steal, to kill, and to destroy. That description has never fit any institution more precisely than it fits the cartel system, an enterprise whose entire purpose is to extract wealth through destruction. Against that, the same verse offers the alternative: life and life to the full. That is not a slogan, and it is a vision of what human communities are supposed to look like, and a reminder of how far the cartel economy has taken entire regions from that vision. The question this documentary leaves with you is not a political one. It is not about which party is responsible or which policy is correct. Those debates will continue in the halls of government. The question this documentary leaves with you is simpler and more personal. Will you be the kind of person who knows, or the kind who chose not to? Will you be the generation described in Matthew 24, going about daily life unaware and uninterested? Or will you be among those who saw what was happening and refused to treat it as someone else's problem? The weapon is already in your city. The war that produced it is burning a country that sits on America's doorstep. The human beings caught inside that war, on both sides of the border, are not abstractions. They are people made in the image of God, deserving of more than silence. Share this video. Talk about what you have learned here. If you are a person of faith, pray for the families in Sinaloa, for the communities destroyed by fentanyl, for the officials and journalists risking their lives to tell the truth in a country where that truth can get you killed. And subscribe to this channel, because we will keep telling these stories with the honesty and depth they deserve. Mexico is burning. The weapon is here. And the people suffering on both sides of this crisis are waiting to see if the world is paying attention.